Hi students, now we're going to be talking about the next period of art called Romanticism. What's interesting about Romanticism is that we see its beginnings in the neoclassical period. We saw that with Jacques-Louis David. We see that with an emphasis on raw or pure emotions that the artist is trying to instill in the viewer. And so this change of period style also happens concurrently with a change in power in Europe. This change of power is the rise of Napoleon and the First French Empire. So if we look here at this map, what we see here is the extent or expanse of the French Empire. Green is the areas directly controlled by Napoleon, and the pink are his allies, and then the countries in orange, those are directly dependent on France, and that is because he's instilled his family members in those locations. So we can see that the French Empire dominates the main continent of Europe, and to maintain these borders, Napoleon's armies are fighting constant battles here for control of the United Kingdom and also the Russian Empire. And Napoleon establishes very tenuous peace agreements with the Ottoman Empire and will extend his control into North Africa. However, all things must come to an end, including Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, this is not a history class, so we can't get into all of the details of his fall, but I will say that between the years of 1812 and 1814, France was fighting against Russia, the United Kingdom, Prussia, and the Netherlands. And then together, the forces against France pushed and exiled him to Elba in 1814. Elba is a tiny island in the middle of the Atlantic. However, and this is crazy, in 1815, he escaped and he landed back on France, and historians refer to this as the 100 days of Napoleon, because for about 100 days he was back in power. And then the forces against Napoleon rose again at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and this is often the battle that people will talk about as the demise of some kind of tyrant, his Waterloo. Waterloo was the name of the site, and when he was defeated at Waterloo, he was sent to a different island, St. Helena, where he died in 1821 of stomach cancer. I know, it's insane. Okay, like I said, we can't get into all of the nitty-gritty about Napoleon Bonaparte, but we do need to think about this change in power, because once Napoleon's gone, who's going to rule France? You will not believe what happened. The French reinstated the monarchy, and they brought in Louis XVI's younger brother as King of France. He was officially coronated as Louis the 10, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Louis the 18th. And this was in honor of his dead nephew who had died during the Revolution and who was the rightful heir to France. So Louis the 18th comes into power, and he is... he's just horrible. He understandably, he had this real kind of hate for France, and the hostility as their king meant that he was a very cruel and unempathetic ruler. In fact, he had been exiled during Napoleon's time, and he was living in England, and the story goes that he was playing cards when Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo. He was gambling at this gambling house, and somebody came up to him and was like, excuse me, Your Majesty, you are now officially the King of France. And he looked up from his cards and he was like, when was I not? So he was just like very ungrateful. And during his coronation, he was in his, grand costume on his carriage, and he's riding through the streets, and people are clapping and cheering, and he's looking at him, and he's like, ooh, ooh, gross, gross. Because all he sees are the people who murdered the monarchy and the nobility. With the reinstating of the King of France, France wanted a constitutional monarchy, meaning that he rules with a group that will advise and work with him to institute laws and governance. Constitutional monarchy. It's like what England has with Parliament and their king. I know. You can't believe it, can you? So we have this change of power from a monarchy to a revolution. We have what is referred to as the First Republic. Then we have the Empire of Napoleon, which is referred to as the First Empire. Now here we are back to a monarchy? Okay, so with this flip-flop of power, we're going to see a change from the neoclassic to the romantic. What does this mean, Ms. Cortez? Well, we're going to watch this transition with the students of Jacques-Louis David. We already saw David behaving in both a neoclassic and a more passionate or romantic way. And we see his students as this bridge between the neoclassical world and the romantic world. These are two details. These are two paintings. This is one of a student of David's anatomy study. And then here, this is to show you students of David working on an anatomy class or in an anatomy class. It's not very fancy or frilly, right? Because for Jacques-Louis David, it's not about the pomp and circumstance of it. It is about the form and understanding and controlling your hand and eye to give these majestic lines and clear understanding of the musculature and the skeletal structure beneath. You also notice in Jacques-Louis David's students' works this balance of highlights and midtones and shadows, and the forms of the men, the male forms, are always in these big, tall, majestic postures. This is the correct way to paint, according to Jacques-Louis David, and therefore according to all art students. Here, this is the student we're going to be focusing on. His name is Jean-Auguste Ingres, and this is his self-portrait as a student of David. You can already see the connection with David. Clear lines, we have balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows, and here he is, crisp, clear colors and definition of form, and he is standing in front of an easel with a thing of chalk, and he's looking out at a mirror. He's looking at himself as he sketches out in chalk what he's later going to paint. He's wearing his painter's cloak, that heavy cloak to keep all of the oil paint off of you, but he's turned it down so that we have this fantastic line over his shoulder where we can see his white shirt. And he's reaching up on that white shirt, exposing this cuff and this tiny cuff here underneath there. Look at the delicate nature of every brushstroke. It's so clean, it's so pure. You don't see dips and dabs of paint. Instead, you see this almost like shimmer or shine of skin, of flesh, as he looks out at us. Isn't he adorable? Oh, he's so cute. Now, I will tell you this. With David, he approves of this. And with a student like Ingres, what we're going to see is this very pure, very true, flattering style. And Ingres emphasizes the use of lines in his work. His compositions are structured based on the pattern and shape of line. What do you mean, Miss Cortez? What do I mean? Look at that. You already noticed this line. This line of his shoulder, the line up his back. Even this sharp piece of chalk here is a line. And what he's doing is he's creating this flow up and down between his head and his fingers. Or more specifically, he's creating a line of sight in this composition between his mind and his intellect and his hand, which puts that observation onto the canvas. So you see this connection between the mind of the artist and the hand of the artist. And he echoes it in the line of the white shirt, the line of the white cuff, the line of the white chalk. Do you see how he's giving you these little triangles? Triangles, these lines, dash, boom, boom, all the way up here. Or they could be seen as pointing down into the chalk. So his emphasis on line. Write this down, please. Ang equals line. Oh, one more thing. I know you're thinking, Miss Cortez, you're mispronouncing it. It's Ingres. It's not Ingres. In French, that's pronounced ang. I don't know what to tell you. It's true. I'm not lying. So we got ang and ang equals line. Write that down. In his forms, in his compositions, the importance is on the line. To help bring this point forward, or to help drive this point home, look at this. This is a sketch, or this is a pencil drawing. I don't want to say sketch because it is a finished product. Ang was popular for these types of pencil sketches, pencil portraits. And here we see a young woman, and look at the delicacy at which he creates her shape of her face, the lines and shadows, and then look at those beautiful little ringlets that come down on either side of her temples. But then notice how the line work starts to loosen as we move away from her face. The ruff of that collar, and then by the time we move away down her body, the rest of her form is reduced to these very fast lines. And with just a stroke of his pencil, he gives us weight of the fabric. He gives us the sense of the body under the fabric. We have a better understanding without any kind of color or any kind of shading, with just line. So Ang is famous for this type of line. People loved these pencil portraits, and there's a lot of them by Ang. The artwork that we're going to look at, though, is this one here. This is the Grande Odalisque, and this is by Ang. Now, I'll define the word Odalisque, but what we're looking at here is a young woman who is on a blue cushioned couch, and she's completely naked except for some bracelets and this gorgeous, thick, very expensive tapestry wrapped around her head. And she's laying on pillows and very expensive silks and taffetas, and she's even got this pelt of fur. And then over here is a hookah pipe. Hookah pipe? Yep, hookah pipe. I want to pull back just so you get the sense of how big she is in this painting. She fills up the entire composition. Now I'm talking about line, and I'm talking about composition when we talk about Ang. So keep that in mind as we look at this painting. This figure here, Grande meaning big. Okay, well, she's very big. She fills up from the top corner to the bottom corner in this beautiful diagonal line. And an odalisque is your next vocabulary term. Odalisque, a female slave or concubine in a harem, specifically from the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan of Turkey. What? Yeah, she's a sex slave, basically. She is the property of her master, and her purpose is to provide pleasure. These types of concubines were popular in powerful houses in the Islamic world, and the Ottoman Turks had this kind of exotic appeal to Europe, or I should say the Europeans had this exotic fascination with the Islamic world and all things, including the practice of odalisques or harems. Here, what we see is this woman who is meant to be a vessel of desire, and she is preserved in this painting for not an Islamic audience, or a Turkish audience, I should say more specifically, but for a French or European audience. This is a European looking at something that is extremely different and titillating and exotic to their everyday lives. This French term, it originates from the Turkish word Odalisque, and we get Odalisque for this Turkish harem occupant. We see her laying on a piece of heavy, or not a piece, a large cushion, and her posture is one that is not new to European art. She, an Odalisque, is exotic, but the posture or the form that she sits in, naked on a couch, that's not new. The great Spanish Baroque artist Velázquez, he painted something very similar when he painted the Toilette of Venus, or the getting ready. Toilette is not just like the toilet where you pee into. The toilette is French for the act of getting ready for an event or the day. So here we see Venus, the goddess of love and sex and beauty, and she's at her toilette. Her son, Cupid, right here, is holding her mirror so she can admire herself. But Velázquez is also giving us this double look, because we can see her and she is watching us. Ooh. So you see the connection here? Velázquez has done this 200 years before or prior. And Ingres in the Grande Odalisque is simply calling back to the greatness of Velázquez. I like to give you these types of paintings or these types of images to let you have a sense of scale. I don't know the student, so if you get to the Louvre in Paris, you should take a picture and send it to me. All right, this is a modified view or an adjusted view of the painting. You can see there's slight differences in that we have the back of the painting, because what we can see is that the original or the actual painting, there is a background, there is a wall, there is the back of the couch cushions. However, often, or I should say in most cases, when the painting is published, we have this very heavy black background. And that's the case with your textbook. And that's not true to the actual artwork. So let's look at this, how Ingres would have wanted us to see it. We would see a background. It's dark, but not completely obliterated. We see the couch cushions. We see this heavy curtain that's been pulled back to reveal her body, and she's kind of playing with it on her foot. Now, I put here in the top corner the period styles, Neoclassicism and Romanticism. Why this transition when we've been talking about Romanticism? Well, because it's still heavily clean and crisp, like what we would see in David, and the callback to the greatness of art history, like Velázquez and others that I'm going to show you, makes it still a little bit of the neoclassic tendencies. To help orient you, to help you understand the fascination with Orientalism that we're seeing in this painting, I have a map here of the Ottoman Empire. So Ingres is painting this here in France, but he's depicting a woman who would be living in the culture of the Ottoman Empire. Now, at the time, the Ottoman Empire extends a massive amount of territory across North Africa, down the Arabian Peninsula, as far as Iraq, and coming as close as the Adriatic Sea. The term for this fascination with the Ottoman Empire, or the exoticism of the Islamic world, is called Orientalism. And that is your next vocabulary word. Orientalism, the 19th century fascination and fantasy portrayals of the exotic East for European viewers. So I've put here in quotes East because it's east of Europe. The Ottoman Empire is east of Europe. Now the word Orientalism, it comes from the Greek. Orient means east, or more specifically, where the sun rises, which happens to be in the east. So Orientalism is this fascination with things in the east. It's also where we get the word orientation, because at orientation you're trying to find your bearings, trying to figure out what's what. It's like you're trying to find your east. You're trying to mark, okay, north, east, southwest, okay, library, dorm rooms, mess hall. Okay, cool. So Orientalism, orientation, orient, east. This fascination with the Orient is seen in a lot of art in Europe at this time. The exotic world of the Ottoman Empire is seen in paintings and in architecture. We're going to look at this one later on in class. This is not part of the Ottoman Empire. This is not in India. This is not in Arabia. No, this is in England. This is in Bristol, which is like right over here. We'll look at it in more detail later. But Orientalism is a fascination with all things that are not familiar to Europe, all things and textures or textiles and architecture and structure and jewelry, even practice of their faith. Here we are looking at Europeans' view of an Islamic mosque and the praying. Eng also has this fascination with art history, and that is why I use the term neoclassicism for this as well. I laugh because Eng was fascinated not only with art history, but specifically with the Italian Renaissance artist Raphael. And this is another painting by Eng in which he fantasizes about what it was like to be Raphael when Raphael was painting his beautiful Fornarina. What? Okay. It's this praised portrait by Raphael. And so Eng is like, oh, I bet that was his young lover. A lot of people were like, oh, I think she's one of Raphael's many lovers. So I want to imagine him painting his lover as she embraces him and loves him. And do you see a remarkable similarity in the headdress and the face shape of Eng's and Raphael's female figures? That's on purpose, because Eng is making a callback to the Mr. Perfect Raphael. I say Mr. Perfect because the art schools are all telling everybody, be like Raphael. He's so good. He got everything right. And so Eng is doing exactly that. Look at this. Oh. Bulgari in 2010 did this ad with Julianne Moore as the Grande Odalisque. I couldn't resist to show you that. But okay. Let's go back. I know this video is running long. I apologize. But back to Eng and the use of line. The use of line here is in the expanse of her back. Now you're looking at this and you're thinking, ugh, she's got like extra vertebrae. And then what's up with her leg? Where's her leg doesn't connect with her hip. It's like she's been dislocated. You are probably thinking, wait, so that means that Eng is a bad painter, right? No, he's not a bad painter. He's doing this on purpose. So what is his purpose? His purpose is to emphasize the line of her back and the turn of her soft feet. Let me go to a higher resolution so I can zoom in on this. Sorry for the scrolling. Here we go. So the line of her back, your eye immediately follows her spine up and down her luscious curves. It creates this diagonal across the canvas. It also makes it seem as if she's languid and waiting for you. She is completely naked. She holds in her hand a fan made of peacock feathers that is right there about to tickle her rump. So we get this kind of erotic tickling. Here, the fur also on her bare skin. Ooh la la. Oh my goodness. Now, what's up with this leg? Why couldn't he put her leg correct? Well, if he puts her leg at this angle, then he can really emphasize her feet. Why her feet? Well, do they look like they spend a lot of time on the ground? Are they dirty? Are they clean? Does she have lots of calluses? No. It's because she doesn't spend a lot of time on her feet. Get it? She spends a lot of time on her back. Get it? So this is here to emphasize her purpose as an Odalisque. She is presented to you, the viewer, just as much as the exotic tapestries and that hookah pipe. All of this is part of Orientalism. These are all exotic objects. These are all expensive imports. This silk fabric here with this brocade, oh, extremely expensive. The jewelry she wears, the fabric, look at this massive brooch, this belt buckle, what is it? Look at then her hair, these massive pearls and rubies. All of this is speaking to Orientalism. And she is not a woman, but another exotic object of the Orient for us to admire. And she has no real power. What do I mean by that? Well, she is an object and we can look at her for as long as we want. She watches us, but with the understanding that we can look and look and look. This line of her back doesn't only emphasize her nakedness, but it also makes her vulnerable to us. How so? Well, her back is open. It's hard to defend yourself from behind. It's easy to defend yourself from the front. So artists, if they want to show somebody is vulnerable, will often give you their back because they are now exposed to you. So she has this vulnerable back. And then her feet, they're not covered, they're not rough, they're not callous, they're very soft, very supple, very tender. If she was to step on a Lego, it would hurt. You step on Legos and it hurts. So oftentimes artists will give you bare feet to emphasize their vulnerability to you, the viewer. So she is completely vulnerable to us. We have the power over her.